Exciting. And I will press record.
Recording in progress.
All right, so lovely to see all these familiar faces. And oh, thank you for some news programs for joining us this evening. Very kind of you. So to get started, we definitely have some new names and faces on this meeting since our incredibly successful large meeting last month. So I definitely want to call out some folks to say thank you and welcome that success. But also acknowledge our board members who show up as well. And I'm asking some of them to unmute. But Doug Flagler, would you introduce yourself to some of the folks who might not know you yet?
Yeah, no worries. Hi, I'm Doug Flagler. I'm on the Ballpark Community Council, and I'm also the chair of the Central 9th Community Council. I live just across the street from Jefferson Park. And yeah, thanks for coming.
Jeff Sandstrom.
Hi, I'm Jeff. I live on 1496 South Main.
And you've served our community for quite some time now, I must say. Thank you, Jeff. I think you've been with us for about a decade. Dan Thomas, hi. How are you doing?
Hello, everyone. Dan Thomas, your neighbor over here on Major Street.
And I should have introduced myself as well. My name is Amy J. Hawkins, and I'm your neighbor on Merrimack Avenue, in between West Temple and Main Street, a block south of the ballpark. I believe there's some other folks tonight whose efforts I want to acknowledge if they're able to. Frazier Nelson, who wrote our community report. Definitely want to acknowledge her efforts as well. Frazier, are you able to unmute? So, oh, hi there.
Yeah, I thank you, Amy. I just want to thank everyone who came to the meeting and everyone who helped put it together. Thank you very much.
Perfect, thank you. Is there anybody else that I can, sorry, I'm scrolling through names. I'm looking to see if there's anybody else who helped organize that meeting who's on tonight. Frazier, can you point them out to me if you see names? I mean, we can also just call them out, but Erica Carlson, Janie Dial, Jordan Menzel, and Missy Grice were all extremely helpful. Wild success. Over 150 people attended an in-person meeting, clearly record-breaking as far as we're concerned. And Frazier wrote a terrific report about the meeting, about 8 pages long, called Ballpark Neighborhood Gathering, a report from neighbors to our community. And we're still trying to make an effort to make sure everybody who wanted to receive that did. So I'm going to plop into the chat window once I can find it. A link, so if you'd still like to receive it, we can make sure that you have it. But that's going to take me a second. There we go. And so that's just a Google form if you wanted to either join our email list or receive a copy of the report. Thank you, Mark Jackson. You didn't have to share your email with everybody. That's so generous of you. But so in addition, there's another question on that form. We're still intending on forming a subcommittee to really engage on that conversation with the city. So if you're interested in joining that and you haven't yet indicated, or you want to like make double, triple sure you've indicated your interest in that, please sign on to that Google form and type it on out. It should take you approximately 30 seconds to click the checkbox, yes or no. So thanks so much. Other community announcements. So I don't believe that we are going to be joined tonight by, well, I know, we will not be joined tonight by Officer Sam Fallows. So I'm going to put in a couple public safety announcements. Thank you for joining us, Senator Plum. Would you like to say hello to your constituents?
Okay, I was going to say that was my can't unmute myself face. So thank you for hitting the unmute. Hello all, sorry to join a little bit late. I'm here to listen in, and if there's a moment, I'd be glad to give you kind of a quick synopsis of my first legislative session, but otherwise just here to listen and learn, so thank you for the opportunity.
That's a tough 45 days to encapsulate all in one short summary, I would guess. Right before we get to, I think we'll cover flooding first, if that's okay, because I think that might be the most universal topic why people signed on tonight, to understand what do those maps mean? How do they affect us? How can we plan, in the most informed way possible? But right before we get to flooding, oh yes, 2 more community announcements. So we do have a mayor's office hours coming up in our own neighborhood in a couple weeks. That will be at Roja Brewing on Tuesday, April 25th from 4 to 6 p.m. So I don't think they're going to be buying anybody beers, but I could be surprised. Who knows? Sometimes they do buy us coffee. Let's see. And as far as public safety goes, we have had a few incidents in the past month. Some of you are aware of the shooting that happened in Ballpark on Thursday, March 16th at 1:30 a.m. in the morning on Van Buren Avenue. A lot of folks contacted me about that to ask if I knew anything about it. It was a lot of gunshots quite early in the morning. This is still an active case, and you can, so there is not anything more to share since the original PR release, and I'm sticking that in the chat as well. But people are still welcome to share any video camera footage that they have of that incident. I believe the case number's in the original press release, but the case number's there as well. And so Detective Fallows said, please highlight this incident to the community again. And if anybody in the neighborhood has cameras that may have captured something, speeding vehicles, that kind of thing, please call the non-emergency number so that you can get a link to transmit that footage to pursue that case. Quite new in terms of public safety, there was another press release today about 2 separate road rage incidents, one that involved a shooting last night around 300. There was one on 300 West, and then there was one on 800 South. So non-threatening, non-life-threatening injuries, but still, I know 300 West and 900 South construction have a lot of us frustrated, but that's pretty intense. So I believe those are also active investigations. So if you have video footage of that, I would urge you to contribute them and check that out. And because I am not a law enforcement officer or a public safety professional, that's all I have to contribute regarding those incidents. But I did want to acknowledge them, certainly, and make sure that folks were in that conversation. All right. The big question. Flooding. Let's see, not sure if I can do this effectively, but we'll see. So you guys may have seen, we're in the floodplain, lots of us. This concerns me a little bit. I think lots of you have seen the footage of State Street from 1983, and 1300 South looked a lot like State Street. So looking at this map, it looks like lots of us are at risk, but are we? What does this risk mean? How can we prepare for it? These are all sort of mysteries. And so we invited Laura Briefer today to talk about what does this mean and what kind of resources do we have, and what kind of information systems are there so we can stay really abreast of this information. Hello, Laura. Welcome to the Ballpark meeting.
Thanks, Amy, and it's great to see everybody. Can you all hear me okay? All right. So I've also invited Cade Moncoeur. He is the Division Director for Salt Lake County Flood Control. And I invited him because Salt Lake County and Salt Lake City have some connected obligations in terms of flood control. Salt Lake County is largely responsible for the waterways, the rivers and streams, and what happens there. And then Salt Lake City, and this is true for many municipalities in the county, are largely responsible for the piped system, the storm drain system that the municipality owns and operates. That being said, our pipe system and the drainage and the creeks, they're all connected to each other. The pipes drain to the creeks, and we work very closely together. And Cade and his team and myself and my team, as well as emergency managers from both the Salt Lake County and Salt Lake City, are and have been working very closely together to understand, what is this great snowpack we're seeing? What effect is that going to have when we enter into the spring runoff season, which, depending on the stream and the elevation that the stream is of the watershed that the stream is draining, it kind of depends upon, that actually factors into the timing of the runoff. So not every stream system usually peaks at its runoff time at the same time. And so we'll get into what the FEMA flood map designations are, but I think it's also really important for everyone to know that, the city and the county, we're both very actively monitoring conditions and planning, and actually planning for worst case scenarios, even though at this time we don't think we're going to see a worst case scenario, but much better to be very conservative in our planning and try to make sure that we're thinking about all of the things that might potentially happen and plan for it. So the planning is very detailed. Just a little bit of information. So just to back up to our runoff characteristics this spring are going to be highly dependent on the weather for the rest of this season. So, the way that our temperature changes. So right now we're seeing kind of a gradual warming, which is really good. And that will help, melt some of the mid to lower elevation snow first and leave the higher elevation snow for later. And so that would create a more measured runoff, which is what we want. We're also entering into this runoff season with some really positive things, which we didn't think were positive as part of the drought. And I still don't think are positive as part of the drought, but positive for flood control is that Utah Lake, which is upstream from us and drains into the Jordan River, is pretty low and isn't expected to hit what's called compromise, which means that we're not going to have a lot of effects. We don't anticipate having a lot of effects from Utah Lake coming into the Jordan River. Also, Great Salt Lake is very low, as you all know. And although happy news is that it's up 3 feet already, even before runoff as of today. So what that means is there's some capacity in the system upstream and downstream of us. Also, since we've had this kind of snowpack, which we last saw in some of the watersheds in 83 and 84 and other watersheds in the county in 2011, since we had this snowpack and since we saw that flooding, that famous flooding down State Street, a lot of improvements were made to the flood control system. And in Salt Lake City, those improvements include the construction of Little Dell Dam and Reservoir. That was a partnership between Salt Lake County, Salt Lake City, Metropolitan Water District of Salt Lake and Sandy, as well as the Army Corps of Engineers. That was completed in 1987, or no, sorry, Cade, when was that? I think.
You're talking about the surplus canal?
No, the Little Dell Dam. I think it started in 1987 and was completed some years after that.
Yes.
And the benefit of Little Dell Reservoir is that we can hold some of the water runoff from the snowpack up in the Parley's watershed until the peak runoff passes. And another benefit, of course, is for water supply. But that really reduces the pressure on the system when we're talking about spring runoff. The surplus canal, as Kate just mentioned, also is instrumental in reducing the pressure on the Jordan River. So the Jordan River can actually be diverted outside of the city at about 2100 South to make space in the river. And then there are a lot of other, on Salt Lake City side, a lot of other drainage improvements that help us to reduce pressure on some of the major drainage systems, and particular to Ballpark, the storm drain system on 1300 South, which collects runoff from Harley's Creek, Red Butte Creek, and Emigration Creek. All of those streams combine around near Liberty Park and enter into the 1300 South drainage system. Well, some time ago, the city constructed another storm drain on 500 East that can bifurcate some of those flows into the drainage system on 900 South. So there's a lot of ways in which we can strategically move water around to reduce pressure in different areas of the city and on the system itself. City Creek was the drainage where we saw the impact on State Street. That was actually exacerbated by the big drain in North Temple. Underneath North Temple got clogged with debris. And actually the clog was about 4 blocks long. So it took a very long time to clear that. And so there were a number of infrastructure improvements on the City Creek drainage, including settling basins where debris could settle and get cleared before it enters into the drainage system, as well as the construction of the Folsom drain, which again can help bifurcate some flows of City Creek. So I'm just giving you a few examples of, what's happened since 1983 and 84, because I get a lot of questions about that. I want to turn it over to Cade to get more specific about what the floodplain mapping means. Yes.
I've got one more question about, very cool to hear about all those, we hear improvements. It's really nice to hear specifics. But one reservoir is kind of rounding it up too high, but one place where water goes in our neighborhood that I'm sure folks would like to hear more about is the role that the Jefferson Park retention plays. Could you talk a little bit about that, just because of how much it will affect, our neighborhood specifically? What can we expect to see?
Which in that area, area flooded in 2017 was the last time I remember flooding.
Yeah, so that's actually brings up another point I wanted to make, in that there's a distinction between impacts of spring runoff, which largely impacts sort of the streams that we see through the city, and monsoonal or high intensity rain events. And so the park and many of the retention basins and detention basins across our city are designed more for absorbing the impact of those high intensity rain events or rain events in general. So that's more of like a stormwater mitigation. What we're talking about in terms of spring runoff is kind of different, and I don't know that the Jefferson Park would play much of a role in purely spring runoff. That's more of a stormwater runoff facility. And 2017, I remember the day, it was July 26th. I was a year into my job as a public utilities director at that point. that was a very high intensity monsoonal storm event. And that's where you would see those basins be more impacted. And I think that's important because we all have experience in our community of seeing localized flooding in different areas, and the causes of those have been different. And the 2017 event that affected the Ballpark area, and I remember being down on like Paxton near the UTA tracks there and seeing the amount of water that had ponded there. That area is shown on the flood map that's on the county's website. And that area is kind of shown as a ponding area, which is more impacted by these rain events rather than spring runoff events. And Cade, if there's anything you would like to correct for me on that too, that please do. But I think that's an important distinction to make as well. And part of the contingency planning that we're doing right now has to do with both, what if we see a combination of spring runoff and a rainstorm? And so we're looking at pinch points in the system as well. Go ahead, Cade.
Sorry about that. I got muted. I muted myself.
Sorry about that. I noticed. I was like, why isn't Cade talking? Honestly.
No, yeah.
Sorry. We'll make you a co-host so you can unmute yourself.
Thank you, Laura. Thank you for everything you said. And you're exactly right. She got it perfect as far as how the snowmelt event that we're going to anticipate this spring, again, spring runoff and rainfall events are not the same type of flooding, and they don't happen for the same reasons. And so Laura went through it pretty well in the fact that we are going to be able to handle most of the runoff through the Parley's Creek, Immigration Creek, and Red Butte Creek system through what we call the Three Creeks pipe system that goes right through your community to the Ballpark area down 13th South. And again, what flood control can do to get ahead of the game is really clear debris preemptively before spring runoff, and that is something that flood control is doing right now as we speak. We're clearing all the creeks that we have jurisdiction over as best we can with the resources we have, and we're working down through the system. So a lot of you don't live on Little Cottonwood Creek or Big Cottonwood Creek, but we're currently out in those two creeks removing debris, and we're also moving down the line towards Mill Creek and then Parley's and then over to Immigration. So, but again, it's a little bit different system for you guys since most of the system you're talking about is piped through the city and through these large storm drain areas. And I don't want to get too specific into the flood control facilities that are in 13 South, but just be aware that the facility in 13 South is a very large box culvert and a very large pipe. So it's a dual system. And so basically when you're driving on 13th South, you're driving right on top of a culvert, right, that basically carries all that flow. So it's a very large system, and we feel like with the way that it's going to be managed, we're going to be able to make it through spring runoff. And then I don't know if you want me to go into maybe some of the ponding or the floodplain designations, the FEMA floodplain designations in your area and what those might mean.
I really would, because that floodplain map is going around, and lots of us in this neighborhood are either in the light blue, or some folks are in the dark blue, or we're near it, and we don't know if I live 2 blocks from the dark blue, what does that mean? What do those colors really translate to? What behaviors should we as residents and business owners be taking to try to be proactive? Because does that make sense?
Yeah. I can just go through them, how FEMA wants you to recognize them, and you can ask questions, I guess. So
I also want to know how you want us to recognize them, because I
right.
think that, you both have intimate knowledge of our system, perhaps, but sure, tell us what FEMA wants to.
Well, maybe I'll just really quickly start on the difference between the type of floodplain that's in the ballpark community compared to a floodplain that's on, and I'm just going to use Little Cottonwood Creek because it's a mountainous riverine system. And I'll try to keep it as least engineering as possible. So if you look at like Little Cottonwood Creek, you're going to have the same type of shading that's going on in the ballpark area. You're going to have that dark blue that kind of surrounds and encompasses the stream. And then as you move farther out, you're going to go to a lighter blue, and then you're going to go to a white, right? If you look at those flood maps. And I guess what I want to stress is if you are in any shaded area, you are more at risk for flooding. And so that is something, you are more at risk. But remember, these flood maps are based on risk and solely risk, right? So they're all probability based. And so you just have to realize that you're more at risk. And if you feel like you need flood insurance because you're in one of those areas, it would be something to look into. If you're in the white area or the non-shaded area, you're less at risk. But I think, and I don't know if Laura brought this up, but 40% of all insurance claims are made in areas that are not in a shaded area. So you can flood in a heavy rainstorm event just from the amount of rain that's falling on your roof or into your backyard and into your window wells, right? If you get into a very heavy rainstorm, you can flood from something like that. You can flood from snow melt that is, melting off your backyard and then sheeting into, badly graded yard back into your house. That can cause problems. And then again, you can flood from a river that's overtopping its banks. And then you can flood from something that's more similar to what I'm getting to is what is in the ballpark area. And the ballpark area is a flooding that FEMA refers to as ponding, right? So if you have a large rainfall event in that area, like you had in 2017, you can have an area of collecting water in the lower area through the ballpark community that is basically ponding up against the railroad tracks, right? And so if you look at the map, there's that really straight line that goes towards the west, and that's basically the ponding of the water next to the railroad tracks. And so that's the type of flooding that happens within your community. And the way it's designated on FEMA's maps is it's 1 to 3 foot of flooding during a 100-year event. So that's pretty concerning, right?
I'm going to share the map again just so folks can see it.
Yeah.
Not to interrupt you.
No problem. So 1 foot of flooding, 3 feet of flooding, you can see that could be a real problem, right? And that's a lot of water. And again, I got to stress, this is during a 100-year event. So in that 2017 event, you didn't have flooding to this extent, right? It wasn't covering this entire area that you would see here. It was more localized, I think, towards the railroad tracks and then through Jefferson Park. Is that correct, Laura? I think it was just along the railroad tracks in 2017 in some areas, but it wasn't this entire shaded area that you have shown here on the screen. This is an area of ponding. And so the way I look at this is I feel like this area is less risky than you would if you were bordering along a big Cottonwood Creek or a little Cottonwood Creek. Now, I don't want to say that you're never at risk, because if you see the lighter shaded area that extends up towards Liberty Park, if during snow melt or during the spring runoff, we have more water than those systems can take, there can be sheet flow, and that's what that light blue area is, that would basically flow down the streets and have this ponding that might happen. So that is what it's basically portraying on the map, is ponding against the railroad tracks. In that case, if you do want to protect yourself in this area, if you feel like you're at risk for this type of thing, it's really hard to say whether you're not at risk or at risk, because I really, I can't tell you what might or might not happen. That's really hard to do. But if you want to sandbag off your window wells, any entry points into your basement, any garages that maybe slope down from top back a curb down into your garage that's lower than the side of the sidewalk, or lower than the sidewalk adjacent to your home, those are the types of things you would like to do with sandbags if you wanted to help protect your property. But again, you're not having flooding like you would along a river or a stream. This is a area of a different type of flooding. Does that help? I mean, I can get more detailed if you'd like. I can go through the designations, and maybe I do want to point that out. If you look at the legend, it says The darker blue says 1% annual chance flood or 100-year flood. And so I get asked a lot, if we had a flood in 1983, that, this isn't 100 years from that point, right? So are we going to flood again? And the answer is, really what that's saying is, in any given year, you have a 1% chance of having a 100-year flood, right? So you can have two 100-year floods back to back. The probability of having that type of event back to back is very low. So that's how it's based on probability, not based on just the fact that it's been 100 years or 30 years, but since the last type of flood. And so that's really the simplest explanation I can give. I can get more detailed if you'd like. We can go through any specific questions you have.
Kelly Lake, who is a business owner on 300 West, has a really good question that I think would affect a lot of folks on 300 West, but also folks in proximity to 900 South.
Yeah. Amy, am I unmuted?
You are.
Okay. I'm wondering about the ongoing road construction that we're all enjoying. Is that road work going to impact, Amy's giggling. She's heard me on this one before. Is that ongoing road work expected to impact any flood mitigation measures? I'm really concerned about some of the really deep trenches that we're still seeing everywhere. Those are going to be swimming pools.
So
yeah, go ahead, Laura. I don't want to talk for you.
Yeah, I mean, so the drainage system along 300 West would be for primarily to handle a rain event. And I don't think the construction is going to impact the operation of those systems during a rain event. The 300 West system is not going to be associated with spring runoff. It's not collecting water from the river drainages, not like the storm drain on 1300 South or on 900 South or further up on North Temple and Folsom. So that's helpful. And also I do want to say that our most current modeling, working with a lot of data from the National Weather Service, looking at hydrographic data and runoff projections, appears to indicate that the Jordan River is going to have capacity to handle the projected runoff. Now, that could change depending on what happens with the weather. But I just want to put that out there too, that what I said earlier in terms of capacity of the Jordan River system to handle this runoff, there's a lot of capacity there. And I also want to distinguish what you're looking at on the map right now is that ponding area that's more associated with rainstorms. And if you go further west along the Jordan River, that's more associated with something like, it could be associated with the rainstorm, but it's also more associated with spring runoff from snowmelt.
I agree, Laura. And I think you're right. The Jordan River system is going to be able to handle what's going to happen this spring. We do, again, Utah Lake is about 4 foot till compromise. And so that's 4 foot before they actually have to release water to make sure that there's no flooding within the surrounding Utah Lake communities. And 4 foot of water in the Utah Lake system is a lot of storage that's still available. So we have 4 foot of storage that we still need to fill up in that system. So we're not going to have to take a lot of water from Utah Lake into the Jordan River, which leaves more capacity for Big and Little Cottonwood Creek to go into the Jordan River and then out by the airport through the Surplus Canal. And that means that we can leave most of the capacity in the lower Jordan River in your area to take the flows coming from these larger storm drains in Salt Lake City.
I see there are a couple more questions in the chat that I think are pretty relevant. I definitely have heard multiple people ask me them about, backing up from drains and sewers. Shelley, I'll see if I can find you to unmute so you can ask your own question. Hey there, Shelley, you're unmuted.
Great. Thanks, Amy. I just wanted to know what's the likelihood of drains backing up from the sewer into the houses or groundwater causing seepage like we hear about in Rose Park. What are the thoughts on that?
Well, I'll say with we may see higher groundwater levels. And so if you have a property or reside on a property where there have been issues with groundwater in the past, you might see higher groundwater levels this time around. So if you have a sump pump, French drain, or something like that, I would make sure that it's in good operation. The sewer backups that occurred previously, again, were part of that 2017 intense rain event where we had a lot of water coming down. There was some infiltration into the sewer system. There were some other reasons based on topography why the sewer systems backed up into basements. So for spring runoff, I wouldn't anticipate that you would have a sewer issue. But I would anticipate that you could see, if you already have, and historically have had groundwater seepage into your basement, you could see more of that just because we've had such a phenomenally wet fall and winter.
Thank you. So realistically then, the people that live here in Ballpark, if there is to be flooding, or if we're outside or slightly outside the light blue area, we would anticipate something that would be more like sheeting. So like our yards would fill up and the street would fill up.
I guess what I would just predict is, and this is hard to say, we don't feel like it's likely that there's going to be flooding like it is mapped on that web map, right? Not due to spring runoff this year. That would be our prediction, that we're not going to see that type of event in this area again. Never say never. It's hard to predict those types of things. The type of event that could cause ponding and flooding in this area would be if the 13 South pipe plugged with debris and then the water really had nowhere to go, and then channeling it down the road would be our only option at that point. That would be an event that would cause the type of mapped issue that you're seeing. But again, if the system itself is operating well and the water's moving freely, we don't think there's this high risk of that event this year.
Right.
Thank you.
Thanks for your question, Shelley.
Thank you.
I'm also trying to look at the comments here, Amy. Let's see.
Amy, is it okay if I jump in here with a question?
I sure wish you would.
Yeah. I guess I just have a question, if our creeks, become so full that they kind of spill out of their banks, maybe further up in the city, would that cause a problem for our stormwater system, the likes of that, I guess is the question that I have. Because in 83, that was kind of the situation where the creeks did kind of overtake and flowed into the city. What would that mean for our the secondary, the other systems?
Well, I think, in that situation, I actually spent some time watching a lot of footage from 83 and 84, which petrified me over a weekend. And like I said earlier, we've had a lot of changes in how the system operates and the infrastructure that I don't think it's likely for that to happen again. But 83 and 84 was also unique in just how rapid the warm up was, like going from here to 90. It was just, really, really dramatic. But if we do have overtopping of banks in the city, first of all, I don't anticipate that to be very significant if it happens, based on the current modeling. But the concern I would have in that situation is keeping debris out of the piped drainage system. And we are already planning with both our Salt Lake County and our Salt Lake City emergency management teams to have rapid assessment teams deployed during the runoff season, especially kind of depending on what happens with the weather. But right now we're planning to have teams that would visit. We divide it up into different watersheds and do very systematic assessments of the system to try to catch things like debris early, or any emerging issues early. That's something that did not happen that I know about in 1983, 84. We look back on the history and we take a lot of the lessons that we learned, not just in the infrastructure, but also in how we manage an evolving situation like this.
I don't want to, keep everybody on too long about this topic, but I think we haven't talked much about what happens if it does happen, or sandbagging availability. Like, how quickly will folks find out if it's a problem? Like, will we get advance notice? I know there's a number, an emergency dispatch center to call to report flooding, but, and I can throw that number in the chat, but could you tell us a little bit about maybe how that would play out in terms of spreading information?
Yeah. Amy, thank you for calling or putting the Public Utilities Emergency Dispatch Center. That's a 24/7 operation. Also, we're working closely with 911 dispatch as well. So there's a lot of coordination between the two. If you see something, definitely report something. I think that's a very important thing. I'm hopeful that with the significant and ongoing monitoring, like Kate and my teams and our EM emergency management teams meet. I don't know, Kate, it's like 3 or 4 times a week right now.
Yeah, that's a lot.
Plus a lot of phone calls back and forth. But, so we're continuing to monitor. So I think, if we start seeing weather forecasts and conditions emerge that give us more concern, that's going to be something that's very publicly communicated. We've set up the Joint Information Center in the Emergency Operations Center for both the county and the city. So a lot of the messaging, and my communications director, Chloe Moroni, is also on this call. She's one of the leads on the city's Joint Information Center. But there's a lot of information and a lot of effort to put information to the public. The sandbagging, we would recommend that getting your sandbags earlier is better, not to wait for a potential event to happen. And on that note, Amy, you and I have kind of had some communications about this, and I also visited with the all of the community councils in City Council District 1 last night. We are in coordination with Cade's team going to put some additional sandbagging facilities along the west side of Salt Lake City that's closer to the Jordan River, just for accessibility reasons. And we have some volunteers. We've actually had a really wonderful invitation from Goldman Sachs. They are going to have some of their employees out at one of those locations on April. Right now, we're thinking April 22nd. That might be subject to change depending on logistics. It's also the same day as the marathon, so we want to make sure we're coordinating. But they, are going to be out there to help people with self-serve, and we'll look at other locations too. So that part is really being worked on through the logistics team, through both the city and county emergency management groups. Did I get all that right, Cade?
No,
or did I miss something?
You got it. And I think if you feel like you need sandbags, you're going to be able to get them. So we'll work with the city to get these areas set up in your closer to your homes.
And again, I think like the sandbags are going to be helpful if you identify, we have a lot of basements in Salt Lake City, of course. And I think that's, if there were to be some kind of flooding, the basement areas are the most vulnerable, and sort of hardening your property with appropriate placement of sandbags, and kind of looking at how the layout of your property, that's really important. And Salt Lake County's, we should put Salt Lake County's website, or maybe Amy has it in the.
I can put it in the chat, maybe.
Yeah. Salt Lake County and Salt Lake City have worked on a joint website so that there's one place for information. And kudos to Cade and his team at Salt Lake County, because the website has a lot of really great information, and some of it is flood preparedness. So a lot of people have questions like, where should I put my sandbag? How is that effective? There's some really great information in there for those types of things too.
Kate, you can correct me if I put in the wrong.
That's Salt Lake City's, and that's a good resource too, but there's, that's Salt Lake County's map. And then there's the main site for, I think I have the main site that also has, let's see, has a lot of it has a pull down menu for the map, and then also some things like things on sandbags, real-time information on stream flow and snowpack, frequently asked questions, and or is that the one you put in there?
Well, I don't want to I'm sorry. I don't want to add more things than people are needing to see. I added Salt Lake Emergency Management sandbag location. So it's basically all the locations, remote locations you can get sandbags that aren't the Salt Lake County facility in Midvale. Or, you can click on your city and go there. And once Salt Lake City, once we update the ones in your area, they'll be added as well. So we'll put those on there. And Laura was correct. If you do want to look at live stream, real-time stream flow, you can go to Salt Lake County's website and then click on stream gauging, and then you can actually watch the flow in the creeks real time during runoff, so you can kind of see where it's at. It's a little bit technical and not so interesting sometimes because it is a hydrograph and that type of thing, but if you're interested, you can do that.
Hydrograph.
Hydrographs are fun, right?
It's something that Kate and I really love. Hydrographs.
It's important to note when we do have flooding, not flooding, during spring runoff, the peak happens in the middle of the night because we're in a diurnal process. So what happens is during the day, the snowpack heats up and gains all that solar energy and starts to ripen, and then it starts to run off. And so what happens is we see peaks more towards midnight, 10 p.m., midnight, or 1 a.m., depending on the system. And then it starts to ramp back down through, into the morning, and it stays lower in the day, and then ramp backs up in the middle of the night. So when we're doing these assessment teams that Laura has been talking about, we're out in the middle of the night, basically responding or looking at problems that are happening. So it's right in the middle of the night.
So just a quick, current factual check. When I looked at the sandbag site right before our meeting, I threw in the two Salt Lake City addresses into the chat right now. The Public Works Operations Division in Midvale, that's about 10 miles away, and the one at Scott Park and Mill Creek, and that's about 5 miles from our neighborhood. There's the mayor's office sent out an email 2 days ago saying that there were sandbags available at the Public Utilities Building on West Temple at about 1500 South, and I've heard different folks experience with that. Could you tell us if you plan to stock that site again? Is it currently supplied? What's going on with that one? Because I noticed it's not listed on your website.
Yeah, we had started. We started that early in the season, and there was just so much demand. Frankly, we couldn't keep up with it. And the parking lot that we had those stocked just, wasn't ideal for going in and out. And so we partnered with Salt Lake County to make a more centralized location, which, I'm glad that people have reached out to us and say, hey, that doesn't work so well. We'd like something closer and more proximal. So now we'll partner again to do that. But yeah, that was not as effective as we had hoped it would be at that location.
All right, thanks for the update. I appreciate it. I just don't want to, people will be angry if they show up and I've told them to go there, as I expect you might know. Thank you for the clarification. Yeah, Danielle, I will throw them all up on some Facebook stuff, if that's helpful. We've got a nice list of resources here. Okay, any more questions that we're leaving out? I know this is a really important topic for a lot of people. It sounds a little scary. We've all seen that footage from 1983. But yeah. I think you can also feel assured that if there is an event, we are a neighborhood that tends to show up and help out. So expect some hands that will be willing to participate and throw in.
I put my contact information in the chat. If anybody doesn't know this, our offices are in the Ballpark neighborhood on West Temple. And, we definitely want to hear from you if you have concerns, if you experienced anything in the 83, 84 floods. We've gained a lot of great insight from people who said, oh, this area over here was a problem. Just that institutional knowledge is also really helpful for us as well. So thank you so much, everybody. Really appreciate it.
Danielle's kind of reiterating a question about, what kind of notice are we going to get if the urgency goes up? I mean, clearly, if we keep getting more and more additions to our snowpack, I think that'll heighten folks' interest in sandbags. But
Laura, when we get through into May and then heading into June, right, which is May into June is going to be really when we're peaking. We'll start working closely with the National Weather Service, and we'll start to put out more warnings and more public notices will start to come through that system to the cities, from the county to the cities, and then down from there. So you'll start seeing that type of thing happen more rapidly as we get into peak runoff, if there's a need to put out those type of notices.
And that will come. There's a very organized process for that through our joint information center between the county and the city, and yeah.
And the state, really,
and
too.
The state too, yes, yeah, and the state. Yeah.
All right, and we will obviously amplify any messages that we get about needing to pay more attention to this.
Yeah, and Chloe just posted in the chat, both the county and the city have social media accounts, and a lot of urgent information these days do get posted on social media, and other places too. If you're not fond of social media, there will be information elsewhere, but that is a really good immediate way to get information as well. So.
Wendy, I like that image. That makes me feel better. All right. Feel good about this? Any other pressing questions? Folks who want to go make a trip out, get sandbags together, we can carpool, maybe? I don't know. We'll have to figure that out.
If you're taking them back to your house, there's going to be a lot of weight and a lot of sandbags in your car.
All right. We will not. We will take Subarus out one by one to the suburbs. All right. Thank you much.
Thank you all.
Thank you for also being receptive to this invitation on such short notice, but I got a lot of requests for this, so thank you.
Yeah, happy to. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right. We've got 2 rezone proposals and 2 apartment buildings to talk about. Jen Plum, do you want to give us the 411 about state legislature stuff in between? Maybe it'll make us feel different about, put flooding in perspective.
Yeah, sure. I'd be glad to. Yeah, you're right. It's all just different levels of thought inspiring, right? We'll try not to catastrophize and focus on some of the good too. But I did put a link up towards the top, and I can re-put it if you want to, where there's a link where if folks want to have a little, my book report on my first session. I think one of the kind of real takeaways from me is that I don't know that there's any better way for me to think about it than drinking from a fire hose. Things are coming at you so quickly, and to have the expertise on everything is impossible. And one thing I really did learn to appreciate was the notes and emails, texts even from community members who were like, hey, there's a bill coming up I have serious concerns about. Or I'll own, for example, there was one bill that I voted for, and I got an email from someone that was like, why did you vote for that? That's blank, blank, blank. And I was like, oh, it was that bill. Thank you, thank you. And in the Senate, we have a second and then a third reading. And so I was really grateful for those, community member feedback moments. So if you are in a space to be engaged in the sessions, it is truly appreciated. It was a tough session in terms of topics. There were some really challenging debates and decisions. We definitely, to me at least, felt like lost some battles that I wished we wouldn't have, and some policies that I definitely was not in favor of. Things like the diminished access to women's reproductive health care, medical care for our transgender youth, school vouchers. Some of these felt, not really great to me. But I do also feel like we did some great work in some areas. We got some good bills passed, and we also stopped some bad bills. So, like I said, my little book report thing, without reading it word for word for you, some of the legislation that I was able to sponsor and get through. So I worked on 6 bills that I sponsored in the Senate, and 4 of them passed, so about a 60% pass rate, which I felt pretty good about. I was able to work on bill to get fentanyl test strips taken off the paraphernalia code, hoping that we can hopefully help our community members stay alive who are impacted by substance use and abuse. A bill that some of the senators kind of teased me that it was my bake sale for the Great Salt Lake, which was a Great Salt Lake license plate bill, acknowledging that as a freshman Democratic superminority senator, you can't go in and ask for $800 million for something, but I wanted to do something that would get money towards education and awareness, and also maybe allow folks to demonstrate how much we all care about the Great Salt Lake and about the water. It's ironic to be talking about that right after a flooding talk, but that felt like at least something I could do as a newbie. I was able to get settlement spending for our opioid settlement funds, some kind of guardrails put in place so that we can hopefully spend the money responsibly, and it can be directed towards the people who have been impacted, as well as prevention in the future. And then finally, a bill that I actually didn't anticipate being able to pass on my first attempt, but it's a bill that really takes out some of the predatory practices that happen within our court systems. So private probation and parole providers who are soliciting people within the courts, preying on people in some of their most vulnerable times, setting them up to essentially have a conflict of interest relationship where their parole provider is also their treatment provider. We were able to get that passed. So I was grateful to be able to work with some of the House sponsors on. Steve Ellison had a suicide prevention and behavioral health access treatment bill. Representative Lesser ran a bill again for the state crustacean designation, some 6th graders actually at Ensign Elementary. It was really one of the kind of most touching things for me to see those kiddos believe they could be part of change. We were able to get that through. An naloxone and mandatory prescribing bill, a settlement fund bill related to our Juul, the e-cigarette sort of things, money that'll be coming for that. And then a bill I worked on with Representative Hollins on sickle cell disease testing. So those were kind of my check marks for the session. For that kind of uplifting, hey, we stopped some bad stuff. I'll finish with that for you. We were able to halt the drag show ban bill, which regardless of your politics, I think that the First Amendment is something that we all hold very near and dear. And what someone defines as adult content varies very much from household to household. For me, I'm a pediatric trauma doc. Guns terrify me, and I would never want my kid or other kids around guns. But for some folks, a gun show is a completely okay space. There we have that moment of what is adult themed to you. We were able to stop a bill that was a Todd Weiler bill that would start something called a drug-induced homicide penalty. So say Amy and I were using drugs together and I supplied those drugs to Amy and Amy put those drugs into her own system. I could be charged with a homicide. Oh, see, Amy and I sharing pugs. That's what we're much more likely to share, pugs rather than drugs.
Accurate.
But it was something that went too far, and I think that would make people concerned about calling 911 to save lives. Finally, there were a couple of diversity, equity, and inclusion bills in higher education that could have cost our higher education institutions millions of dollars. And a feral cat bill that, boy, I got more emails on the feral cat bill than on anything else during the session. So, you know, you never know what it is that's going to get people upset. But it was a bad bill. It was a bill that essentially said that animal control would not have to release animals that they trapped, and also that people feeding feral cats can only feed them during daylight hours. So I don't know if they turn into gremlins or something. I'm not entirely certain what that came from, but that bill was stopped. There was a bunch of budgetary, biggest budget ever done, $29.3 billion. We were able to get some caregiver compensation for folks who are taking care of their loved ones at home. $50 million towards deeply affordable housing, some air and water innovation grants, public education. We did go up there on the WPU by 6%, weighted per pupil unit, but some of that was tied towards those vouchers, and there's going to be some interesting things there on it. I did see a question, when am I going to sponsor a bill for restitution for damages done to businesses and residents as a result of the Gail Miller Homelessness Resource Warehouse? That's pretty much a municipal issue. I hear you, I feel your pain, but that is definitely not a state level bill. If you have some policy concerns or issues you'd like me to send or me to work on, send them my way, and I'll work on looking through the legislative research and general counsel folks to see if there is something, because I'm always willing to dig, but I'm also pretty honest with myself about what is within the scope of things I can do. So anyway, please let me know if you have other questions or thoughts, and you know, I'm learning. It's my first session, so I feel free to help educate me as we go. Thanks for the opportunity, Amy. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Senator Plum. That was very rapid, excellent. And Jim Greasley, I did go up to the Hill and did actually ask to, in a bill, not just one bill about restitution for damages, but in the homeless text amendments at the state level this year, I did ask for there to be a broken window clause. It was not considered, but I will ask other people again, because I agree that you all are suffering, and that would be helpful. And other municipalities do have broken window clauses for the businesses near their homeless shelters, and I really wish that we could do the same. So, alrighty, let's talk about a rezone. Lars, let's see if I can find you and unmute you. I'm looking for. Let's talk about the West Temple rezone on 1720 and 1734. Is Diana Martinez here? Maybe you could, I will find you in the chat. Maybe you could raise your paw.
I am, sorry.
Yes, you are, thank you.
I don't know how to do my paw.
It's hard, there's so many different icons on the bottom.
Sorry, but I'm here. Thank you for inviting city staff. We appreciate that opportunity to come before you today. Lars was on.
He still is, I'm asking to unmute him.
Oh, there we go.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. I'm on.
Welcome, both of you.
Thank you.
Thank you. So, yeah, I guess I own the properties of 1720 and 1734 Southwest Temple. And I am applying for a rezone to RMU 45. It is single family zone, but the master plan calls for an increased density of zoning, and I've requested the zone that is adjacent to the properties to the north. And then it's also surrounded by other multifamily zones. But that's my request.
Amy, did you want me to go through the process or just wait for questions?
Let's talk a little bit about, let's see, Kevin, it would be on the west side of the street. So the property to the north of it would be the townhomes on the corner of 1700 South and West Temple.
Exactly.
So this is a rezone from single family zoning to a zone called
RMU 45.
RMU 45, and that's a zoning designation that allows buildings at a maximum height of 45 feet. And I'll throw the open house, the virtual open house link into the chat so folks can look at more of the details there.
Thank you.
And
Yeah,
if folks have questions and can figure out the reaction icon where you can lift your hand, please do.
So I just wanted to add, to be more specific, it is specific to residential mixed use zone. So it's not just any kind of use that could be in here, but the height would be up to 45 feet. So if there's any questions. And just to add, right now it's in the 45-day review period. So we're asking that the Ballpark Community Council submit comments in regards to this. And of course, any general public is welcome to send me comments as well.
So I realized that we did talk in the context of the master plan, we did just pass the Ballpark Station Area Plan, but the Ballpark Station Area Plan ends at 1700 South. It doesn't cover our entire neighborhood and going to 21st South.
Correct.
So that means that the master plan that covers what should happen there is an older master plan passed in, I think, 2006, the Central City Master Plan, is that right?
Exactly, yes, I think you're right on the year as well. Yeah, so the density there, I mean, there's just so many zones in that area beyond that 17th South mark. And a lot of those zones have much taller requirements or limits. So it is kind of unusual because it's not technically in that ballpark area that we're focusing on with the new rezoning. So it's going to be a little bit different, but again, there are no development plans with this right now. The applicant is kind of looking at something similar to that townhouse look that's to the north. The property that he has is just shy of half an acre. So he is going to be restricted on height anyway because of fire department regulations. So there's not a lot he can do specifically with the two properties because they're so small. So he will have a lot of regulations put on, even beyond what the zoning would allow.
Looks like we have two people with their hands raised. I'll start with you, Jesse. Should be able to unmute there.
Word. Thank you. Just curious a little bit more about that process. I know, Diana, you just mentioned there's no plans currently. So what does that process look like if and when plans kind of come to fruition? I live in the properties just north of that, so curious what that looks like, and then kind of what other expectations through that process of once the rezone is complete, then is it just kind of we wait until plans are approved? Just kind of curious what that looks like, and then also that secondary aspect of what kind of outreach or communication is then given to the neighborhood of plans to be put into place.
Right, that's a great question. So first of all, let's talk about the rezone because that's what's at hand. The process for that is that we go through this 45-day period where we're waiting for comments from all of my coworkers, city reviewers, the community council, any general public. Beyond that, when it ends the 45-day period, then I will put it on an agenda to go to the Planning Commission. The Planning Commission will hear it and they will give a recommendation to the City Council. At that point, it kind of goes into a little bit of a limbo because the city council staff does their own scheduling for the city council. And so whenever it can be put onto their agenda is up to that staff. That could be a process anywhere after the planning commission for, about 3 months to a year, depending on when they can get to it, to hear it. Assuming they get it onto their agenda and they do approve it and the new zone is in effect, then it's going to depend on what plans the applicant does bring to us. So if it's something that is going to require a plan development or a design review, that would go back to the planning commission, and it would be kind of the same process, except for the planning commission would make that decision. And at that point, we would notice the neighbors. If the applicant comes back with development plans that meet all zoning requirements and height requirements, and he doesn't have to ask for any modifications, then it would just be built by right. And that would just go out as a building permit. So you wouldn't get direct notice, but you're always welcome to go into our city citizen portal to check on projects that would have that. And you can check on the building permit for that just based on the address. Of course, that would be self-notification. You'd have to look by yourself. We wouldn't send out any additional notification. But you would definitely be aware of the project if you wanted to reach out to one of the planners or, like I said, the citizen portal. Was there another question?
Looks like Jeff Sandstrom has one as well.
Do you want me to proceed?
Yes, please.
My question is, a number of years ago, I think it was about 2016, the community council, the planning commission, and the city council passed a downzoning with the intention of protecting the main residential core of the neighborhood with single family homes to keep those intact, with West Temple being the main backbone of that corridor. This seems to me like it may be encroachment on the downzoning that we worked so hard to pass.
And was that beyond 17th South, to the south of 17th South?
It was. It included all the way south, almost to 21st South, but it excluded the main roads and commercial corridor zoning.
Well, I don't know the history about that. I will definitely look into that. Like I said before, there is a hodgepodge of zones in that area from 17th South and beyond to the south. A lot of them, we have a residential office zone in that area. We have an RMF 30 in that area. So there's a lot beyond the single family R1 5000 that this is. So
Diana, if you want, I have a screenshot from the Central City.
The master plan, or
yeah, and I can project that if that would,
sure,
would not be disruptive. Sorry, Jeff, I didn't mean to interrupt you either.
No problem.
So that is the master plan. That's not the current zoning. So just to let you guys know that difference. So this is more of a future look than what is currently zoned. And I mean, even this kind of gives that hodgepodge of multiple zones in this direct area. Along West Temple from 17th and beyond, there's office use, residential office use. You've got the new housing project that's just down the street from this. You have single family homes, you have multifamily unit buildings. There's a lot of different uses in this. And then of course you've got the CB, the community business that's all along 17th. So it's kind of a hard area because you've got so many of these zones going on. At this point, I don't have a recommendation to the Planning Commission completed yet. So we're still in analysis on that. I'm happy to get back to you to answer the question after I've gone through my analysis. But I don't really have an answer for you at this point, just
No
because
problem.
the zoning has changed quite a bit in this area.
Looks like we've got Selena Johnson.
My question was answered through the other discussion. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, I just wanted to point out, so because the ballpark plan ends at 17th South, this is the most updated master plan. I agree that this isn't the current zoning, which is still a hodgepodge. But when I was reviewing this master plan, I did notice that the intention for this area was to retain current lower density zoning south of 17th South to preserve the character of the area. And I don't think that language has been amended or updated anywhere. I haven't found that.
Well, and you don't have the entire, let me see if I can look at it really quick, but there is a part based on that coloring. If you look at the, let me see what the wording is. Sorry, it's going to take a moment. On that map, there's, on the central community future land use, there is a note that says low, medium, and medium density land use designations may include multiple zoning designations. And a couple of the two classifications that they put are RMF 35 or SR 3. Those are fairly compatible to the RMU 45. Just the height is a little bit different. And so there is more compatibility with this proposed zone in that area than what you're showing. It just, the height is going to be a little bit different, but like I said, because of the small lot size, he is going to be restricted anyway in that regard. So just initial analysis, we are looking that it is fairly compatible with what's going on within that first 17th to 18th, if you will, along West Temple. So it's not totally uncalled for. It does meet a lot of the zoning. It's just that the height isn't exactly compatible to like a 35-foot single family dwelling. And like I said, between 17th and 18th, you've got a big mix. You don't have only single family, you have a lot of multifamily, and then that residential office use is in there as well. So it's a big mix.
Looks like we just have some confirmation. So the maximum buildable height would be 45 feet. Diana, is that accurate?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, I said yes.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't
hear me.
There's some screaming outside my house. I think I was distracted. Okay. Any other? Oh, Frank, excuse me. I see your hand.
Hi. I just want more clarification on this height limit. I live in one of the townhomes just to the north. So what I'm understanding is that while the zoning would allow technically up to 45 feet, there's some other issues with regards to the size of the lot and potentially like the fire department restrictions on the height. Like what does that end up, like what are we looking at it being lowered down to with those kind of considerations?
It wouldn't necessarily be like a reduction in the height that they would have to meet. It might just be more fire code requirements that they would have to meet. I'm going extreme, but like putting in sprinkler system. So that kind of thing. It wouldn't, They would still have the ability to go to 45 if they could meet all of the requirements. And fire code requirements would be a little tough to get, much higher than what you have in your townhomes to the north.
Okay.
That is
right. So, but conceivably, he could build an apartment building that's 45 feet with that zoning.
Again, I don't think so. I mean, yes, he could have an apartment building, but the number of stories that he could have and the number of units, again, is going to go back to that fire code and building code requirements that he would have to meet. And that probably would kind of stifle the height and the amount of density that he could have within that building.
Gotcha. Okay. All right, cool. Thank you.
Welcome. Thank you.
Thanks for that screenshot, Lee. That's helpful. It's also like significantly less blurry than the old map from 2006.
Thank you for unmuting me, Amy. I think I clapped instead of raised my hand earlier, but I raised my hand. This is Kelsey Lindquist. I'm one of the planning managers. I work with Diana. I was just going to jump in. Diana's absolutely right. It's challenging because when we are looking at a map amendment, which is what is before you this evening, we're not actually looking at a development proposal because all of those code and restrictions will come in at a later time. I think really the lots will be challenging when it comes down to parking, fire requirements, access, etc. So really what you could be looking at if this was to be approved by City Council could be quite different than what we're all conceiving this evening. But like Diana said, if they are seeking any sort of modification or need relief from zoning, you would see it before you in the future. That's all. Thanks, Amy.
Sure thing. Frank, I'm going to guess you don't have a follow-up question. You just left your hand up. But if you have a follow-up question, you're certainly welcome to ask it.
I didn't know I had to lower my hand. Thank you.
I forget all the time. All right. Seeing no further discussion, shall we move on to talking about another rezone?
Thank you for your time.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for your clarity. All right. Goltz Avenue and Jefferson Street rezone. Kelsey, were you going to speak about this as well? Sorry, I should have just made you co-host.
Okay, I'm back. I'll just be support for Brooke. Brooke is the project manager for this. So
oh, great.
It's up to you if you want to leave me unmuted, but I can jump in as needed.
You seem like you can behave yourself, so.
Most of the time. Thanks.
All right, I'm finding Brooke.
Hi, can you hear me okay?
Totally.
Okay, great. Yeah, so the applicant is not present tonight, but I can just briefly discuss what they're proposing and the properties associated with their request. So they're located at 135, 159, and 163 West Goltz Avenue and 1036 South Jefferson Street. And the applicant is TAG SLC, and they are proposing to rezone these properties from RMF 35, which is a moderate density residential zone, to RMU, which is residential mixed use. They're also proposing to amend the Ballpark Station area plan, future land use designations of these properties from medium density residential to high density residential mixed use. So that's just a that's what the applicant's requesting. And we do have an open house blog post available for this project as well that has additional information, including the applicant's narrative as well.
I just stuck the link to that in the chat.
Okay. Oh, perfect.
All right, I know there's at least a couple of people on here from that area of the community.
Looks like
So,
Lee.
Hey, Lee.
I'll ask him to unmute.
Hi there. Can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you.
Awesome. Is it all right if I share my screen? I just have a couple pictures to kind of give some relevancy to at least the area.
Yeah, I'll make you a co-host there. Okay, you should be able to share your screen.
Okay, can everyone see that?
That's great. Thank you. That's very clear.
Okay. This was on the applicant's proposal, and it's just kind of the area. So if you can see my mouse, this is one of them. These are two of the others. This is the Jefferson one, all kind of located around that C9 lofts, which I noticed they referenced a lot in their proposal. Just to give some just perspective of our area, they talk a lot about needing to reclassify this as high density. And I mean, this is our area. This is 9th South at the top, clear to 21st. State Street's this purple line on the right. You got I-15 on the left. And, you know, the contrast of just actual houses to all this red is commercial, the purple are giant apartment buildings. So we're just focused on this little area here by Jefferson Park, which is this. So their areas are here in the yellow and over here. Just to give everyone some perspective of just the general area as far as housing or zoning is, that there's, I mean, a lot of this is commercial, like the Target's over on the left there, and they're putting in giant apartment complexes as well. But yeah, just to give everyone some perspective of the area. This is a street view of Goltz. 135 is this house on the left here, this tannish one. One of those two together, this duplex is one of them, and this duplex is one of them. And you know, a worry I have is that this RFM, this is the same zoning that the C9 lofts have, which give you up to 7 stories. And, you know, this is a kind of visual representation of that in those areas. Just absurd, to be honest. And then another big concern I have for that representation is that this designation also negates all shared landline setbacks. So they can go right to the sidewalk, they can go right to the back, they can go fence to fence with this, which is something that C9 did with this designation. This is the house next to its driveway. They went right up to it. This is from Second West. This is that house, just right up to their property line. And, you know, other places in the area have been doing the same thing. This is some apartments on West Temple and about 850 South, just right across 9th there. So, I mean, that's a big worry I have, is that they're going to just try and build monoliths. And in their proposal, they list specifically that they want it to be transit oriented, which makes me wonder, like, so there's going to be no parking in this 5 to 7 story building? Because there's already no parking on Goltz with the housing that we have. And I was kind of hoping they'd be on to maybe clarify some of that, but I guess they didn't make it on. But yeah, that was my main concerns with this proposal of theirs, because they were on about a year ago with a similar proposal. I don't think it was as tall. I think it was like 45 foot or 50 foot, something like that. And just, you know, with no perspective of what they're planning to put there, I don't see a reason for this in a little neighborhood lot. I mean, these are like 10th acre lots is all. And, you know, what are you putting there that needs to be 75 foot tall, potentially? I'm sure like the previous one, there's fire things and other related issues to come to the actual design. But just in general, that is a heck of a house in a tiny little space of land. And where are all those people going to park? So those are my main concerns. Thank you.
Thanks, Lee. I guess I just had some thoughts too that you know, this is across the street from me, and I think it's interesting that they're asking for variance to the master plan for the neighborhood before they've even implemented it. So I think it's kind of telling that the developer wants to go bigger than, you know, the city's already proposing for more density and height or density in the neighborhood with future zoning, and the developer already is trying to go bigger than that. So. Anyone else with comments or questions? Amy?
Yeah, actually, I mean, so the name of the zoning is residential mixed use, but in that one of those very compelling visuals that Lee showed of, I believe it was a portion of the central 9th lofts next to a single family home, the ground floor appeared to just be, you know, a parking garage or cement block. And I think this is something that comes up in our neighborhood over and over again when we talk about, you know, mixed use or ground floor activation. We're concerned that that those are sort of misnomers when we look at what actually shows up, which is like a 2-floor cinder block wall and a parking garage. Is there anything about the zone that requires some degree of ground floor activation?
As far as I could tell, no. It gave them a height limit, and they can actually, 75 is the general height limit, and with special consideration, they can actually go to 125.
125, yeah. I noticed that too, and I thought, wow.
Yeah, and between that and the no setbacks, you know, they can pretty much fill the lot. And yeah, with them being all in their proposal pushing, hey, we're close to transit, like it's like in their mind potentially, oh, everyone that lives here is going to take the train, so there'll be no cars, so we don't need parking. And you know,
I would like to address some of those zoning specific questions, or Brooke can.
Thank you,
Brooke,
Kelsey.
do you want to talk about the design standards that are required for the RMU?
Yeah, so I don't have them right in front of me specifically, but as far as height is concerned, the 125 feet is permitted through design review approval, but that is for a specifically mapped area in the downtown. So that actually would not be applicable. As far as design standards are concerned, the RMU zone does not have very many at the moment. I can't remember off the top of my head if a ground floor use is required, and maybe Kelsey could speak to that.
Yeah, I have them pulled up. The ground floor use, one is not required for the RMU. We do have, just get to it. Ground floor glass percentage, building entrances, and then a blank wall limitation, like how long a blank wall can be. And then just kind of the basics, screening of mechanical equipment and service areas, and then required lighting. So you're right, Amy, it could potentially end up with like a non-activated ground floor by right.
Bummer.
Yeah.
That's my official comment.
It's an accepted comment. Thank you.
And for those that want to make comments offline, is there an email or something that you can put in the chat for people to send those comments to?
Yeah, I'll drop my contact information in the chat, and anyone can feel free to just email me their comments or give me a call.
And the Planning Commission does look at those comments when deciding on these things, right?
Yeah, so right now, as far as the planning process is concerned, we're currently in the 45-day early notification period. So property owners and occupants within 300 feet of the site have been notified of the application, as well as the applicable community councils. So during this comment period, we will take public comment and feedback. And then the application is also currently under review by various city divisions. So the public input period will be ending on April 20th, but we do take public comment up until the Planning Commission hearing, public hearing through that. And then the Planning Commission will make a recommendation to the City Council, and then the City Council will hold a public hearing and take additional public comments on the matter, and we'll have the final decision as well.
Brooke, and in addition to submitting written comments, folks are welcome to give public comment at both when it's scheduled for the Planning Commission and when it's scheduled for City Council, correct?
Yep, that's correct.
Great.
And Fraser, it looked like you have your hand up.
Yeah, I just wonder, Amy, if it would be possible to request that the board of the Ballpark Community Council, as you mentioned, as a potential action, helped, either vote against this proposal if people felt that was in order, or coordinated some letter writing or something, because I'm getting a sense that the neighbors are very concerned about this potential development. And Lee, thank you for your excellent work sharing what those concerns are.
I share that sense. I suspect that a vote will be in order, and I think we might be coordinating with Lee to submit some valuable documentation as part of that letter. Lee, do you mind if we borrow some of those visuals potentially, if the vote does indeed turn out that way?
No, feel free. They're just some Google Street screenshots and from the Salt Lake City zoning maps was all. But yeah, of course.
If you've done the work. Yeah. All right. Any further questions or we could, no, I'm not going to try to use the poll. That sounds like a disaster. But I think it's fair that we can write about an overwhelming sense at the meeting. I apologize, folks. I've got Zoom skills up to here, not up to here. Unless you want to make a poll, Doug, you're grinning. No, I'm grinning good. About your poll confidence.
Okay. That is not in my wheelhouse.
All right. Okay, thank you, Brooke.
Thank you so much. And I'll drop my contact information in the chat. And if anyone has any further questions or comments, feel free to reach out.
Terrific.
Thanks, Brooke.
Okay, thank you.
All right, we've got 2 more proposals to go, and they are about non-hypothetical things. These are not rezones. These are for actual buildings, that have numbers of units attached to them and structures that we can consider and think about. Amazing. we don't have to use Lee's awesome, rectangles. We can look at actual plans. It's totally cool. We're going to talk about Paxton Place and Ballpark Apartments, and I don't have a preference for who wants to go first. But I do need to know who to unmute. All right, Michael, I see you.
Thank you. Sorry, was that waving at me?
I believe Senator Plum is signing off and is indicating her, or she's waving to somebody that she knows.
Oh no, someone asked if I fell asleep and I was actually just trying to read something very tiny in my lap, so apologies.
The project that I am here to discuss is the Paxton Place project.
Great, I will throw that into the chat, the open house.
Thank you. And I'll let the applicant, they're here, I'll let them share their plans, but I'll just talk a little bit about what process they're here for first. So they are in for what's called a design review. And the reason that they need that approval is because the project is in the CG, General Commercial Zoning District. In that district, any proposed project that would be more than 60 feet in building height needs to get design review approval. And I don't remember off the top of my head what their proposed height is, but I think it's 70 something feet. So they're within that threshold. The way the process plays out is pretty similar to a zoning amendment up until the point that it gets to Planning Commission. So at the moment they're in their 45-day early notification period. Notice has been sent out to property owners and residents within 300 feet. Once that notification period ends, then they'll be scheduled for a Planning Commission hearing. The difference between design review and something like a zoning amendment is that the Planning Commission is the final decision maker. So if you have comments that you would like to make in a public forum, the Planning Commission would be the opportunity to do that. And I think that's about all I had to say. I know my applicants are here.
Yes, thank you. Travis with JZW Architects. We have the owners on here also. See Kyle, Brian, and Warren. They're all here. If I know. So this property is located at approximately 215 Paxton just on 200 West, just right next to the track station. It would be a 5/2, so there'd be 2 stories of parking with 5 stories above it for the residential, approximately about 150 units.